folks, the fallout from Biden's bank crisis. I was against bailing them out in 2008, and I'm against bailing them out now. It's time for a cold, hard reality check. The government only has two levers to control the economy. A bailout is not one of them. The first one, the Fed can control interest rates. This is called monetary policy. Now, as it sits right now, the Fed has to make the choice whether they were going to continue to raise interest rates that will, not may, but will continue to destabilize our banking system. Banks function on the ability to borrow money, then loan it out at a higher rate to you and I. When you rapidly raise interest rates, there is a lag. The money banks have already borrowed under the interest rates from 2 years ago, i.e., long-term bonds, is no longer getting them a high enough return to cover the new rate increases to service their own debt. This is exactly what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. The only other option the Fed has here is to not raise interest rates or maybe even lower them. But that will undoubtedly cause more inflation. This is a fact. This is not my opinion. What we are seeing are the real-world consequences of the trillions of extra dollars we printed over the last 2 years, which is the other lever of government, fiscal policy. Congress controls this. They screwed this up royally, by the way, folks. We warned them this would happen, and Democrats and even, honestly, some Republicans, almost like shopping drunk with their daddy's credit card, made the biggest financial mistake of our lifetimes. Here's the rub. The people legislating this don't know what they're talking about. And the people who actually understand it don't want us, you and me, to understand it because they are making millions off of it. Now, look, the Fed, the FDIC, the White House, all coming out and saying, nothing to see here, nothing to worry about, guys. This means they are very worried, despite saying they're not. Now, the Biden administration is working overtime to downplay this and pass blame onto Trump. Watch, it's already started.
During the Obama-Biden administration, we put in place tough requirements on banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, including the Dodd-Frank law to make sure that the crisis we saw in 2008 would not happen again. Unfortunately, the last administration rolled back some of these requirements.
This is a lie. This is a bold-faced political scapegoat for horrible and irresponsible fiscal policy by a Democrat-controlled government for the last 2 years, folks. Plain and simple. The genesis and the reason this bank collapsed and why it happened is because interest rates rose. Why did they rise? To stem inflation. Why was there inflation? Because Democrats printed trillions of dollars and force-fed it into the economy. Period. Full stop. Not negotiable. The irony here is that the regs that Trump rolled back in 2018 from the Dodd-Frank bill were provisions of that. And in the, this was Chris Dodd, Barney Frank. Guess who was on the board of Silicon Valley Bank? That guy. So if the regulations of the Dodd-Frank bill were so star-spangled awesome, banks would still have the option to practice additional securities, right? Even if they were legislatively rolled back? I mean, one would have to assume that the father of that rolled back legislation would want to practice that in the bank that he was on the board of, no? And this is the root of our problems, folks. Those who pass laws while in Congress often go to the private sector, maybe even the boards of these banks, and feel very differently about how those laws affect them when they're on the other side of it, making money. Which leads me to my next dishonest and misleading practice being used to shore up the donor class buddies who parked their money at Silicon Valley Bank, the bailout. Now, Biden was very super duper careful not to use this term, but it is a bailout. Make no mistake, 90% of the deposits there were over the $250,000 insured limit.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them. No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Let me repeat that. No losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Instead, the money will come from the fees that banks pay into the Deposit Insurance Fund. The management of these banks will be fired. If the bank is taken over by FDIC, the people running the bank should not work there anymore. Third, investors in the banks will not be protected.
First off, I want to back up here. The federal government can't and should not be in the business of deciding if private companies should fire people. Should the executive be fired? Of course they could. They're incompetent. But the government should not have a hand in that. Absolutely not. Second, this is a word salad. Over $150 billion were from depositors. Only 70-ish billion were investors or shareholders or other parts of the bank. So that means the American people will likely fund the reimbursement of up to $150+ billion that could be potentially lost. Tens of billions of which belong to Chinese companies. Now you're probably a lot like me and you're thinking, how about no? So no way should the people of Montana or Florida or especially Ohio, who are dealing with a toxic chemical spill, mind you, should foot the tax tab for Chinese tech companies to be made whole on their investment with a private company here in America? No, that dog don't hunt with me. There's also never been a more clear contrast of the political class versus the rest of America. The people of East Palestine can't get you to cover their relocation, can't get a senior official to show up for 3 weeks, but in 24 hours, Biden can commit $150 billion of your tax dollars to the very banking system that Democrats have been dogging on for the last 3 decades? Look, if you're not mad at these crooks yet, hold on to your hat. Let's look at the math of this bailout. Just to put this in perspective for everybody, the money they are about or could give to Silicon Valley Bank could reach $150 billion, as I was just saying. That could give each one of the 4,761 residents of East Palestine almost $32 million each. But in a town that went about 70% for Trump, they couldn't even get a visit from a senior official. So why the differences in treatments? 2 reasons. First, a bunch of these banks were enticed and even rewarded with incentives to invest in stupid policies like ESG and DEI garbage, the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff that doesn't work. This bank particularly committed $5 billion to finance green energy. That's not economically viable, folks. It's on their own website. Keep in mind that this bank collapsed over a roughly $2 billion liquidity problem. Bet they wish they had that $5 billion they invested into solar panels. The federal government, pushing an agenda, must attempt to maintain the notion that some of these money loss strategies like ESG and DEI are in fact a good idea. They're not. A 3rd grade math problem could reach that conclusion. But agenda over everything. That's the Biden administration way. And they are willing to spend your tax dollars to back it up. And second, specifically looking at SVB, a lot of the people who had big money in there were big-time left-wing donors. There, I said it. Don't believe me? Look at what Janet Yellen said immediately after SVB's collapse. She says, I'm not going to bail them out at all. But a few hours later, we find out that Oprah Winfrey had almost $600 million invested in this bank. Where does she stand on Biden? Don't think for a minute she doesn't have a direct line to the very top of the decision-making pyramid. Fact check that. I dare you. Let's look deeper. Hollywood got hit too, with Variety reporting in the wake of the sudden collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, Rapbook, a company that provides payroll services for TV and film productions, said payments submitted through its platform will be subject to delays. Really? Because Hollywood never rubs shoulders with Democrats, does it? So somewhere between that revelation and 24 hours later, we saw this headline. Business Insider. Federal regulators announced that depositors of the Silicon Valley Bank will be paid in full. Would you look at that? Now, of course, this could all be a coincidence, but I'll let you be the judge. You know what the most infuriating part about this whole thing is? And mark my words, folks, I believe this is the beginning of the federal government trying to take more control over the banking system, just like they did with student loans, just like they did with healthcare. This is why we got to let them fail. Will people get hurt? Unfortunately, yes, they will. Will it be better for the system in the long term? Absolutely. Otherwise, if the banks know they can be as risky as possible, make the maximum profits with impunity, leaving you and I to pay the insurance policy or the bailout, our banking system is just another tool of the banana republic.